Welcome back guys. In this video I'll be comparing the performance, image quality and input delay of FSR 3.1.2, LSFG 2.3 and AFMF 2 frame generation techniques. We'll be testing them in Dragon Age The Veilguard running on my Rog Ally that has Windows 11. I have the Z1E extreme variant of this device. This game does not support FSR 3 frame generation officially, so I'll be using the free DLSS Enabler mod to enable FSR frame generation. Using the same mod, I'll enable AMD's anti-lag 2 tech that helps in reducing the latency. Just need to enable the in-game reflex setting in order to access anti-lag 2. Just make sure you have installed AMD's GPU driver on your Ally. It needs to be Adrenaline Edition version 24.7.1 or anything newer than that. On my Ally, I have installed AMD's latest preview GPU driver that is optimized for Dragon Age The Veilguard. LSFG is a universal frame generator that works on any GPU. It's included with a paid application called Lossless Scaling that sells on Steam Store for around $7. It will be interesting to see how AMD's anti-lag 2 tech works with LSFG. AFMF 2 is AMD's driver level implementation of frame generation. It doesn't rely on any game data like motion vectors, unlike FSR frame generation. Can be enabled from Adrenaline software. Just make sure you have installed AMD's latest GPU driver in order to access AFMF 2 on your Rog Ally. I'll be showing you the real-time latency using anti-lag 2 latency monitor. In order to enable it, just need to press its hotkey Alt-Shift-L. For this game, I've set the UMA buffer size to 6 GB. My Ally is running on BIOS version 441. Using a 30 watts manual profile, all 3 power values set at 30 watts. 720p resolution CPU boost disabled. Connected my Gulikit KK3 Max gamepad to Ally via Bluetooth mode. Quickly show you LSFG settings. Launch lossless scaling application. Not using any of lossless scaling's upscaling algorithms. LSFG version 2.3 will be using its X2 mode. It will try to double the FPS. Not using LSFG's performance mode. Clip cursor setting enabled. Sync mode default. Maximum latency 1. Draw FPS setting enabled. Capture API DXGI. That's it. Settings. Start as administrator setting enabled. Hotkey for enabling LSFG. Control Alt and S. Minimize the application. Launch Dragon Age. Show you its Adrenaline setting. FreeSync enable. VSync disable. That's it. AFMF 2 disable for the timing. Using Adrenaline's overlay to show you the performance metrics. Now I'll enable anti-lag 2's latency monitor. Its hotkey is Alt-Shift-L. Keep pressing the hotkey to cycle through the display options. Latency 24 milliseconds. Display settings. Window mode set to borderless windowed. Very important for LSFG. No FPS cap applied. VSync disabled. Triple buffering off. Optiscaler set to DLSS. I have already installed DLSS Enabler mod. So we have access to DLSS on Rog Ally using the Optiscaler's quality preset. DLSS frame generation disabled. It's basically FSR frame generation. Reflex enable, very important. If it's not enabled, anti-lag 2 won't work. You won't be seeing this FPS latency value. Render scale set to 100%. Graphics. Texture quality set to medium. Texture filtering set to high. Rest of the settings set to low. Contact shadows enable. Ambient occlusion HPAO. I'll be testing the game in the Elven Ruins area. Thick foliage. Very demanding on the GPU. Vignette and motion blur effects disabled. Show you Optiscaler settings. I'm using FSR version 3.1.2 upscaler. That's it. Mods XCSS version produces some noticeable ghosting in this game. That's why I'm not using it. This game comes with FSR version 2.2 upscaler. There's a character. Here we are getting around 44 FPS. Latency value is around 48 milliseconds. This is with anti-lag 2 enabled. You can disable anti-lag 2 on the fly by pressing and holding the right control key. I'll just do it. As you can see, latency value increased to around 67 milliseconds, roughly a 20 milliseconds increase in latency. I'll just enable anti-lag 2 again. Yeah, latency value dropped down to around 48 milliseconds. Real world input delay. So anti-lag 2 helped in reducing the latency by around 20 milliseconds. This is the game running without any frame generation technique. Now I'll enable FSR frame generation. Latency value is inversely proportional to the FPS. Higher the FPS, lower the latency. It's as simple as that. On. Back to the game. FPS increased to around 76. Yeah, frame generation is working. You can see latency value also increased. Now we are getting around 67 milliseconds of latency. Before enabling FSR frame generation, this was the real latency with anti-lag 2 disabled. Now I'll just disable anti-lag 2. Latency should increase. Yeah, it increased to around 87 milliseconds. Roughly a 20 milliseconds increase in latency. Real world input delay. So the real latency with FSR frame generation enabled is around 87 milliseconds. Game is definitely playable. I can observe the added amount of smoothness. No significant graphical artifacts. There is some minor ghosting around the character model. Very difficult to observe it, especially on a small display. Here we are hitting the GPU bottleneck, 74 FPS. Okay, I'll just disable FSR frame generation now and enable AFMF 2. Off. Open Adrenaline software. Enable AFMF 2 from the game's Adrenaline settings. Set search mode to high. This prevents frame generation from getting disabled during fast visual motion. Performance mode set to quality. I'll apply a 60 FPS cap as well. Idle FPS and peak FPS value set to 60. In this game, base FPS is not going to exceed 60, so yeah, it's not required. FPS may exceed 60 in some indoor areas. Back to the game. FPS increased to around 77. Can observe the added amount of smoothness, but I am also observing some fuzzy textures around the character model. Not impressed by AFMF 2's image quality. FSR frame generation produced a better looking image. Some garbled textures can be observed. But yeah, you can use AFMF 2 in this game. 77 to 80 FPS. Controls are very responsive. Yeah, latency value is around 53 milliseconds, but this is with anti-lag 2 enabled. I'll just disable anti-lag 2. Frame generation lag value around 17 milliseconds. Okay, now latency value increased to around 77 milliseconds. With FSR frame generation, we were getting around 87 milliseconds. So AFMF 2's latency is lower than that of FSR frame generation, but 10 milliseconds, as simple as that. But not impressed by the image quality, I'll be honest. Now I'll be measuring LSFG's latency. Disable AFMF 2 from Adrenaline. VSync off. 60 FPS cap still applied. We'll be using Afterburner overlay to show you the metrics. Press its hotkey, Ctrl Alt and S. LSFG is working. Base FPS dropped down to around 35. FPS with frame generation around 72. LSFG's overlay is getting blocked by anti-lag 2's latency monitor. Partially visible. Can observe the added amount of smoothness. Not observing any significant graphical artifacts. Character's head flickers when I move the camera in complete circles. Minor flickering. Doesn't occur when I move the camera at a normal speed like this. Latency value is around 58 milliseconds. LSFG's latency is slightly higher than that of AFMF 2 by around 3 to 4 milliseconds. This is with anti-lag 2 enabled. LSFG latency is slightly lower than that of FSR 3 frame generation by around 10 milliseconds with anti-lag 2 on. I'll just disable anti-lag 2 now. Yeah, latency value increased to around 85 milliseconds, 87 milliseconds. We got roughly the same latency value with FSR frame generation. Almost a tie between FSR frame generation and LSFG in this game. subtitles are not flickering. I'll just go back to FSR frame generation, disable LSFG. Just wanted to recheck the latency value and the image quality. It's the same spot. Latency value increased to around 67 milliseconds, roughly a 10 millisecond increase in latency with FSR frame generation compared to LSFG. It's a tie between the added amount of smoothness. Character's head is not flickering though, so I'll give the win to FSR frame generation when it comes to image quality. I don't recommend using AFMF 2 in this game. Just make sure you enable anti-lag too. It really helps in reducing the latency. You can even use it without any frame generation technique. So that's it with the video guys. I hope you find it useful. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.